Some patients went to sleep and did not wake up for decades, not metaphorically, not in a coma by injury. They simply stopped, mid-sentence, mid-movement, mid-life, and remained there, suspended, while the world around them aged and changed and forgot them. The disease had a name, Encephalitis lethargica. It had a beginning. It had eventually a near disappearance. What it never had was an explanation. In 1917, a Viennese neurologist named Constantin von Economo began documenting something he had not seen before. Patients were arriving with an unusual combination of profound sleepiness and paralysis of the muscles that control eye movement. They were not unconscious in any familiar sense. They were present and yet absent, aware enough to respond, too disrupted to function. Von Economo's clinical observations were recorded and formally described that year. What he could not have known was that this was not a local anomaly. It was the opening signal of an epidemic. By 1919, cases had been reported across Europe, and the disease was moving. France, England, the United States, Canada, Central America, and India all recorded outbreaks. The presentations were not uniform. Some patients experienced that signature, deep sleepiness. Others developed movement disorders. Others still showed psychiatric changes, altered behavior, altered personality, in ways that blurred the boundary between neurological and mental illness. Scholarly histories would later characterize the 1917 to 1927 outbreak as the first pandemic centered on the central nervous system. England and Wales recorded their highest notification year in 1924, with 5,039 cases and 1,407 deaths in that year alone. A formal survey by the Matheson Commission counted 52,781 diagnosed cases across 14 reporting countries between 1919 and 1928. Those are the numbers the record supports. Global estimates circulated at the time and afterward, but the formal count is what the evidence holds. And then, without obvious cause, the epidemic receded. By the mid-1920s, new cases were declining. By the late 1920s, the acute wave had largely disappeared. Medicine had recorded it. Medicine had not explained it. Here is the detail that changes how the rest of this case reads. Encephalitis lethargica did not simply pass through its victims and leave. For a significant number of survivors, the acute phase was followed by something slower and more permanent. Post-encephalitic parkinsonism. Rigidity, immobility, a kind of locked stillness that could deepen over years until a person was, for practical purposes, unreachable. Some of these patients were institutionalized. Some would remain in that state for decades. The epidemic ended. Their imprisonment did not. The question that investigators and researchers carried forward was both medical and causal. What had caused this? And what, if anything, could reach the people it left behind? On the causation side, the timing of the outbreak overlapped with the 1918 influenza pandemic, and researchers took that temporal association seriously. The hypothesis that influenza triggered or enabled encephalitis lethargica had intuitive logic. Two catastrophic neurological and respiratory events occurring at the same moment in history, spreading through similar populations. But temporal association is not proof of causation, and as the Brain Review published by Oxford Academic concluded, no single cause has been established. Scarce preserved biological specimens from the epidemic period, combined with the rarity of modern cases, made retrospective investigation extraordinarily difficult. The hypothesis was not confirmed, it was not definitively ruled out. The causal record remains genuinely open. However, a competing explanation pointed toward a novel pathogen, one distinct from influenza, that emerged, spread, and then effectively vanished. That would account for the epidemic's sharp rise and its equally sharp decline. It would also account for why researchers searching for a connection to influenza kept finding the evidence incomplete. But the pathogen, if it existed as a discrete agent, was never isolated. No confirmed specimen has been produced. The absence of biological material is not evidence of absence, but it does mean the hypothesis cannot be confirmed from the historic record. What the record does confirm is what happened to the survivors who remained in institutions. In the 1960s, a physician named Oliver Sacks began working with patients who had developed severe post-encephalitic parkinsonism. Some had been in their condition for decades, motionless or nearly so, trapped in states that resembled a kind of waking suspension. Sacks administered L-DOPA, a drug that had recently become available and was being tested in Parkinson's disease. The results, which Sacks documented and later described in his book Awakenings, were dramatic. Patients who had been unreachable began to respond. Movement returned. Communication returned. For some, it was a form of emergence after an absence measured in decades. But the clinical story did not end there. The sources are clear on this point. The responses were not uniformly lasting. The awakening effect was real. A permanent cure was not what L-DOPA delivered for all patients. What Sacks's work established was the possibility of partial restoration and the existence of a group of people whose suffering had continued long after the epidemic that caused it had been largely forgotten. The case of Encephalitis lethargica sits at an uncomfortable intersection. It is historical enough to feel settled, and yet the central question, what caused it, is not settled at all. It reveals something specific about how medicine handles epidemics that recede before they are understood. When a disease disappears, the urgency to investigate it disappears with it. Preserved specimens, contemporaneous biological samples, and systematic data collection were all limited. By the time researchers had tools that might have answered the causation question, most of the material that could have provided answers was gone. The 52,681 formally counted cases represent only the reported cases in countries that were tracking them. The real scale is not recoverable from the record. The patients who developed post-encephalitic Parkinsonism and spent decades in institutional care represent a group whose experience was, for most of that time, invisible. Not to medicine, which knew they were there, but to the wider world that had moved on. Oliver Sacks' work brought some of those patients back into view. The awakenings were documented. The limitations were documented. The gap between what happened to those patients and what caused it to happen in the first place was not closed. Return to that opening image. A person, mid-sentence, mid-movement, a body that continued to exist while the life inside it was placed on hold. The epidemic that produced that state swept through Europe and the Americas during one of the most disruptive decades in modern history, left nearly 53,000 formally counted patients in 14 countries, and then subsided without leaving behind the biological evidence that would allow the question of its origin to be resolved. The strongest remaining question is precise, not whether the epidemic happened. The record confirms that it did. Not whether it caused lasting harm. The evidence of post-encephalitic Parkinsonism is clear. The question is what biological process initiated it. Every competing hypothesis requires evidence that the historical record does not contain. And until that changes, the origin of Encephalitis lethargica remains exactly where it has been for a century. Unresolved. The unsolved vault. Every case leaves something behind.